I know many of you had a choice tonight. You know, do you come here or do you go to the mall? And I'm happy to see many of you chose here, although my wife is down at the mall. But, good evening. Welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the store, along with my wife, Lisa Muscatine. And we are so excited to be hosting Paul Murray, who's here to talk about his novel, The Bee Sting, which is now out in paperback. We would have loved to have hosted Paul for an event last year when The Bee Sting first appeared and gained such glowing reviews and widespread popularity. It was one of our best-selling books over the last Christmas holiday, but he didn't make it then. So when the opportunity came for a talk with him this month, we very much welcomed it. Bee Sting is Paul's fourth novel since he started turning out books about 2 decades ago, and his previous three, An Evening of Long Goodbyes, Skippy Dies, and The Mark and the Void, have, like The Bee Sting, all met with critical acclaim. Anybody here not read The Bee Sting yet? Yeah, okay, well, a few. All right, well, let me just say it tracks the unraveling of a down-on-their-luck family in a small town in Ireland's Midlands, and I will leave the rest to be explained at the talk. I mean, it's really many things, right? As all of the rest of you know who've read it. I mean, it's tragic, it's comic, it's suspenseful, it's inventive. It's an epic, sprawling social novel filled with shifting perspectives, colliding coincidences, and deftly plotted climaxes. One reviewer summed it up as a novel about the past and our inability to ever outrun it. And while Paul has agreed with that description as far as it goes, he also has said that his interest was not so much in the past coming back, but the ways it obscures the present and stops us from embracing the future. So we're so thrilled to have him here to talk more about how he views the book and how he wrote it. In conversation with him will be Dan Coyce, writer, editor, and podcaster at Slate, and the author himself of 5 books, the latest of which, Hampton Heights, was published last month. Also, I'd like to note that partnering with P&P on this event is an arts organization, Solas Nua, which means new light in Irish. Based here in DC, the organization focuses on bringing the best of contemporary Irish arts to the United States. And Andrew Dolan, who's with Solas Nua, would like to say a few words. So, Andrew.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew from Solas Nua. I see many Solas Nua faces here in the audience tonight, so thank you for joining us here. Yeah. Solas Nua actually read Bee Sting in one of our book groups a few weeks ago. If you're interested ever in discussing Irish literature, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, we have book groups almost every week. Solas Nua brings the best of Irish arts to DC. So if you're interested to see more Irish literature, theater, music, film, everything in between, check out our website. I just came from the staging of our show that opens this weekend. In addition to Paul, we have 3 Irish artists in town right now that are prepping an innovative theatrical experience using audio, headphones, and VR. It's going to be a good time. So thank you, Politics and Prose, for partnering with Solas Nua on this. Looking forward to the conversation.
Give it up for Paul Murray, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, just start reading. That's what they're here for, buddy.
Hello. What a pleasure to be here. May I say thanks to Brad and to Andrew and indeed to Dan for putting this all together. And thanks to all of you for coming along on a lively night in Washington, D.C. Is there something happening? Is there like... and so I'm going to. So this is I'm going to read from the Beasting. I'm just going to read for about 4 minutes, just from the start of the book. And the book is set in a small town in the Midlands of Ireland. The Midlands, for any of you who are not familiar with them, are sort of the middle. So conforming to a rare moment of conforming to type there for Ireland. So Ireland, you know, makes people think of waves crashing off cliffs and rugged mountains and so on. And the Midlands are sort of the flat, boring part that people sort of tend to kind of pass through. And this first section of the book is narrated by Cass, who's the daughter of this troubled family that the book is about. And she does not have a high opinion of the town, so I'll just read her it. In the next town over, a man had killed his family. He'd nailed the doors shut so they couldn't get out. The neighbors heard them running through the rooms, screaming for mercy. When he had finished, he turned the gun on himself. Everyone was talking about it, about what kind of man could do such a thing, about the secrets he must have had. Rumors swirled about affairs, addiction, hidden files on his computer. Elaine just said she was surprised it didn't happen more often. She thrust her thumbs through the belt loops of her jeans and looked down the dreary main street of their town. I mean, she said, it's something to do. Cass and Elaine first met in chemistry class when Elaine poured iodine on Cass's eczema during an experiment. It was an accident. She'd cried more than Cass did and insisted on going with her to the nurse. They'd been friends ever since. Every morning, Cass called to Elaine's house and they walked to school together. At lunchtime, they rolled up their long skirts and wandered around the supermarket, listening to music from Elaine's phone, eating croissants from the bakery section that were gone by the time they got to the checkout. Cass felt she'd known Elaine forever. It made no sense they had not always been friends. Their lives were so similar it was almost eerie. Both girls came from well-known families in the town. Cass's father, Dickie, owned the local Volkswagen dealership, while Elaine's dad, Big Mike, was a businessman and cattle farmer. Both girls were of slightly above average height. Both were bright, in fact, they were consistently at the top of their class. Both intended to leave here someday and never come back. Elaine had golden hair, green eyes, a perfect figure. When she bought clothes online, they always fitted perfectly, as if they'd been made with her in mind. Writing about her in her journal, Cass used words like grace and style. She had what the French called je ne sais quoi. Even when she was clipping her toenails, she looked like she was eating a peach. When Cass came around to Elaine's house, they would sit in her bedroom with a carousel lamp on and look at the Miss Universe Ireland website. Elaine was thinking seriously about entering, though not for the title itself so much as the opportunities it might offer. The previous year's winner was now brand ambassador for a juice company. Cass thought Elaine was prettier than any of the contestants pictured online, but it was tricky. Each of the girls competing to be Miss Universe Ireland, and from there to be Miss Universe for the world / universe overall, had an adversity they had overcome. One had been a refugee from a war in Africa. Another had needed surgery when she was a small girl. A very thin contestant had once been very fat. The adversity had to be something bad, like a learning disability, but not really bad, like being chained up in a basement for 10 years by a pedophile. Cass's eczema would be a perfect adversity. They wondered if she held her skin up against Elaine's long enough, whether she could pass it on to her, but it didn't seem to work. Elaine said the adversity requirement was unfair. When you think about it, it's almost like a kind of discrimination, she said. The housekeeper knocked on the door to say it was time for Elaine's swimming lesson. Elaine rolled her eyes. The swimming pool was always full of band-aids and old people. Coming from here, she said, if that isn't an adversity, I don't know what is. Elaine hated their town. Everyone knew everyone. Everybody knew your business. When you walked down the street, people would slow their cars to see who you were so they could wave at you. There were no proper shops. Instead of McDonald's and Starbucks, they had Binchy Burgers and Mangan's Cafe, where the owners worked behind the counter and asked after your parents. You can't even buy a sausage roll without having to tell someone your life story, she complained. The smallness wouldn't have been so bad if the townsfolk had had a little more sophistication, but their only interest, besides farming and the well-being of the microchip factory, was Gaelic games. Football, hurling, camogie, the county, the cup, the under-21s, that was all anyone ever talked about. Elaine hated GAA. She was bad at sports in spite of her grace. She was always the last up the rope in gym class. In games, she confined herself to the sidelines, where she scowled, flicked her hair, and wafted reluctantly back and forth with a general direction of play, like a lovely frond at the bottom of a noisy, grunting ocean. The Tidy Towns Committee, of which Cass's mother was a member, was always shiting on about the natural beauty of the area, but Elaine did not accept this. Nature, in her eyes, was almost as bad as sports. The way it kept growing, the way things like crops or whatever would die, and the next year they came back. Did anyone else get how creepy that was? I'm not being negative, she said. I just want to live somewhere I can get good coffee and not have to see nature, and everyone doesn't look like they were made out of mashed potato. Cass didn't care for GAA either, and she agreed about the general lack of je ne sais quoi. For her, though, the presence of Elaine was enough to cancel out the town's faults. She'd never felt so connected to someone. When they messaged each other at night, sometimes they'd stay up till 2 in the morning. They got so in sync it was almost like they were the same person. If Elaine texted Cass to say WTF was up with that jumper today, she'd know immediately whose jumper she was talking about. A single unexplained word, bagatelle or lookout, could make her laugh so loud her dad would hear from across the landing and come and tell her to go to sleep. In some ways, that was the best time of all, better even than being together. As she lay in bed, messages flying back and forth between them, Cass would feel like she was flying too, far above the town, in a pure space that belonged completely to her and her best friend. Most days, they went to Elaine's after school, but sometimes, for a change of scene, Elaine would want to come to Cass's instead. She liked to hang out in the kitchen talking to Imelda. That's what she called Cass's mother, Imelda, so casually and naturally that after a while, Cass started doing it too. You're so working those jeggings, Imelda, she'd say. Oh, you think so? Cass's mum, Imelda, would say. And she'd lean over with impossible willow-like grace to examine the back of her own thighs. I wasn't sure about the stripes. The stripes are what make it, Elaine would say conclusively, and Imelda would look happy. Cass's mother was a famous beauty. She too had blonde hair and green eyes. It's so weird she's your mom, Elaine said. Doesn't it make more sense that I should be her daughter? Then we'd be sisters, Cass said. No, I mean instead of you, Elaine said. Cass wasn't sure what to do with that, but the fact remained that Elaine got on better with her mother than she did. Imelda liked to give Elaine face creams to try out. They traded beauty secrets and product advice. Cass was a bystander in these conversations. Nothing works in her skin, Imelda said, because of the eczema. It's a real adversity, Elaine agreed. Thank you.
I'm so glad to be here chatting with you, Paul. Welcome to Washington and an exciting week. So the book came out last summer here in the States, I think also over in your part of the world. So you've done quite a few interviews for it. And even before then, you did a lot of interviews for the previous 3 books. And so I was a little daunted at first trying to think of, fresh, exciting questions I could ask you during this conversation. But then I remembered my own experience with interviews. I don't have a lot of stock answers prepared. Faced with a question, I'll just say whatever the hell comes into my head. I just figure I'll work it out as I go along. I think most normal people, I think you are probably basically the same. You're just, someone asks you a question, you're having a conversation with them, right? And so all of a sudden you read in the newspaper yourself saying like, my new book is entirely about how people who like REM are better than people who like U2 or whatever. So I read a lot of interviews with you and I picked out some things you've said over the years and I'm going to say them to you. And I want to know how you feel about them now. Are you ready? Okay, we're going to start with some things, especially about this book, The Bee Sting, a marvelous book. Everyone give it up for the book, The Bee Sting. Here's the thing you said about The Bee Sting. I could just dump all my sadness into the book and then go off and have a sandwich and feel fine. This was about writing the book. Do you stand by that? Was that what the experience of writing the book was like?
Dan Coyce. He sent me an email saying, what's the most annoying question you've ever been asked? Because I'm going to ask you that. So
Then I thought of some more annoying ones.
Yeah, I guess it is funny the way that there's a great quote by the French philosopher Michel de Montaigne. He said, I will say anything to you by way of conversation. I will say nothing to you by way of counsel. So he's just, like if you're having a conversation, I think part of the point of that is that like nothing that you say I wouldn't necessarily stand behind any of it,
No,
So,
absolutely not.
So, I wouldn't. Whatever those quotes are, I conceivably could have said them, but
Yeah.
I have no idea what I was talking about. Just a journalist asks you something, and you're just like, how can I get out of this situation?
Right.
And it's like an AI. What's the most probable token to come after the last couple of seconds? With regard to the sadness thing, that was probably the first interview I did for the book, right before it came out. And I was talking about, I was revising the book during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And when COVID, it's funny how the COVID sort of quite quickly been erased from our memories. And I find I've got this aversion to talking about COVID or reading about COVID. But when it did break out, I had this fear that civilization was going to collapse. That's what it sort of felt like. It feels like that now as well. And a lot of my friends, know a lot of writers in Dublin, and a lot of them were really sort of thrown or disoriented by COVID in terms of like they couldn't start work, they couldn't start new work. But I had this gift of this. I'd written this huge draft, and I could just go up every day to my box room. We were sort of in Dublin. I don't know what it was like here, but there was a 2 kilometer sort of cordon. You couldn't go any further than 2 kilometers from your house, and there was Garda checkpoints to stop you, and they'd send you home if they caught you.
It was not like that here.
It was not like that here, no?
No. Oh, no.
What a surprise.
We'd stage a revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we were just, the Irish are like, who imagine themselves as a rebellious people, were actually very, very compliant with the quite draconian measures. And the draconian measures, like not to go on about it, were because the health system is so beleaguered in Ireland that there weren't enough ICU beds for any kind of like number of like serious illnesses. So if you got sick, you were fucked. So everyone just had that at the back of their minds. But basically, so at this time of like of anxiety, to say the least, I felt fortunate to be able to have this book to work on, which is about trauma and anxiety and fear of the future, and I could sort of exercise those feelings every day, and I did feel sort of like the better for it. I did have sort of I felt like I had sort of a way of kind of processing those feelings.
People talk about writing often as a way of processing their own personal trauma, like on the page, but often it's just a way that you can just get rid of the bad shit, whatever it is, and then it doesn't manifest itself in that form on the page, but it inflects what you're doing in some way, and it does sort of get rid of it in a way.
Yeah, like I think it was Albert Camus. I'm bringing out my big guns here, quote-wise.
Yeah. I take back what I said about not preparing answers.
The really meta thing to do would have been to find your interview answers and go, well, like, Dan, did you say the following things?
I should have offered you that opportunity. I'm sorry.
What did Camus say? Oh, Camus said that everything you write about it's feelings, it's things that happened to you when you were 2 or 3. It's stuff it's so deep down that you don't even remember it. It's like it's these sort of otherwise kind of unprocessable emotions that are like drivers of everything you've been since, but are sort of inaccessible to you, except when you have this kind of alchemical, this alchemical process of writing. Like so the sort of the origin story of the bee sting was that I came from writing a screenplay, and if you've ever worked in a screenplay, it's a very, very restrictive form of writing. It's very formulaic, and there's a lot of sort of very serious. They're obsessed with keeping the page count down, for instance, which obviously in my book it's not something I'm good at.
Right, there's rules about when certain things have to happen and when your act 1 ends, and
everything costs money. So I'd written this kind of quite low budget film,
which is funny because at the end they never make it, the screenplay. So why are they so worried about stuff like that?
They made this one, so that was the thing. So it was kind of a fluke, but it was kind of the golden handcuffs, because they'd say things to me like, if you don't make this change, we won't make the movie. So like it's and I'd spent 2 years on it, and with movies you don't get paid until the first day of production, but everything costs money. So I'd written this kind of low budget thing that I thought would be easy to get made, or wouldn't be sort of hamstrung by finance. But I hadn't predicted, so there was stuff like there was a lot of cars. It's set in the suburbs, a lot of cars, and it turned out that none of the actors could drive. So anytime you wanted a scene with them driving down the street, you had to hire like a pickup truck and put the car in the back of the pickup truck and put like the dolly sort of, like sort of whatever, 10 feet off the ground, and ensure the pickup driver as well as the, the people in the car and so and block off the roads and so on. So everything you do is
It's like, can you make all the scenes where they're driving into scenes where they're sitting on a bench?
they were like it had to be driving, but like but it was so like if you're used to writing books where if you want a unicorn flying into the sun, that's no problem, but with this it was like just one sort of impediment after another. So it made me really realize how much freedom you have as a writer in all kinds of ways. You're not bound, like as a screenwriter, you're really an employee. Like you've got the producers telling you, like, well, we don't like this direction. We think you should go that direction. And it's not an editorial note. It's like it's a command, So I started to work on like ideas for books while I was sort of in the final throes of the screenplay. And I had these three sort of very different ideas, and I spent like 6 months compiling sort of files of notes for these ideas. And to cut a long story short, I went to the editor and said, like, which one should I do? And he pointed to the short, funny one, which was like a romantic comedy set in Trinity College. This is like about 2 years before Sally Rooney published Normal People. So I mean, I could have made a lot of money if I just gazumped Sally. But when I came home to write it, so I went to London and I had this conversation with the editor, and he said, "Do this one," and I was delighted because I'd blocked out the whole thing. I had it all mapped out, and I had sort of scenes written and I had dialogue sort of constructed for it and so on. But when I started like actually writing it, on the page, I realized that I didn't want to do it because, I mean, I could write these funny scenes, but I really felt like I was punching the clock, and I had to just grind the stuff out, which is not the way I normally feel when I'm writing. And I think the reason was partly that I sort of overplanned it, which I always tell my students like not to do,
Right.
because it sort of kills it. But also because it didn't really engage the various kind of anxieties I was experiencing at that point. Like, as a human in the world, in sort of the end of 2017. So you're sort of halfway through the Trump presidency. Let's hope that never happens again. And I was just, the world seemed like this is before COVID even appeared. Like the world seemed like such a hostile, unhappy place, and people felt like they're evil. Like I don't understand people. Like who are they? What? All of these terrible things were happening, like the rise of the far right. Climate change, Bolsonaro, so on and so on and so on. And this kind of romantic comedy was pure escapism, and but it didn't work for me.
You didn't want to escape. You wanted to attack or address these things.
It didn't work for me. It didn't work for me to like. It felt like sort of I could create like sort of professionally speaking, I could have created like a confection that people might enjoy escaping into. But that's not like if you're writing a novel, as you know, like it's a long haul, and it has to engage the writer, and it has to excite the writer to keep you interested enough in doing it, because it's such a marathon, and there's so many doubts that rise up along the way, that there has to be more than just like this seems like a marketable product. Like it has to be something for the writer themselves.
I've got another thing you said about this book. The only time I really felt bad about the book was when I did the word count at the end of the first draft. I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, I've done it again.
I think Michel de Montaigne said those words.
So you had this idea for a short book, and then it wasn't working for you, and so you start writing this other story. But I assume you don't go into it intending for it to be of epic length. You go into it intending to write a story that does what it needs to do.
Yeah, so having made this kind of quite like this lovely speech that I just did about like sort of how this book was kind of ticking emotional boxes for me, and so I had a great old time like writing the book because it was very exciting to work on, and it did sort of address various fears and traumas that I was feeling, and sort of quite deep things about parenting that I was kind of really wanted to think about, and but I didn't do a word count. I was writing it longhand, and I was just watching this pile of paper get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then when I typed it up and I was revising it, it was all these separate files. And right at the end, I stuck all the files together, and
Your computer started smoking.
yeah, it was really like, because it was just it's like you've got freedoms as a writer that you don't have as a screenwriter, but you don't, it's not unlimited freedom, it's not sort of, it's like 4,000 pages long, and it's going to come with like sort of like a hologram of me, and like it's like, as like a white middle-aged man, um already, there's the publishers would have considered, like, is this a voice that people need to hear more of? Is this
Do we need 650 pages of this guy?
There you go. Yeah. So, and I've worked in. I've been a writer long enough, but before I was a writer, I worked in a bookstore, and well, just as a book buyer, when I see a 650-page book, I don't want to dissuade anybody here from making the same mistake that I have in the past. It's you're kind of like, oh man, this is like.
How are you going to get it home on your bike?
Yeah, so all of those feelings, were, or that one enormous feeling, was very present. So I sent it off to the editor, and editors, certainly my editor, it took about 10 weeks for it to come back.
Yeah.
And in that time,
in your mind, you're like, well, she's going to start reading it instantly. She's so excited, but it turns out she has other authors who have turned in books before you, and she has to read them.
But it's agony. That's like an agony. It's
the worst.
Agony. Yeah. So I mean, I was going through the whole thing, and I thought it was a good book. I thought it was a solid book. But as soon as I sent it, I was like, is it a good book? Because no one had seen it, So I thought maybe it's a bad book, So, and I didn't know, and I was literally in pain. I got this like mysterious like gut pain that sort of lasted for like 10 weeks until she came back, and she was very enthusiastic, and she didn't raise the issue. They were very confident about the book from the get-go. And they didn't worry about it being overlong, because they felt like it's very plotty, and it's tight, so it'll keep you, once you can get folks to pick it up, then she was kind of confident that they would stick with it.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about, though, just writing like a 150-page book for fun? Just like knock one out.
That's what so when I went to the editor, I had these three different ideas, and the romantic comedy was that very one. It was a short one, and it was kind of like mostly jokes, like it was mostly just sort of just gags of one kind or another, and it, like on paper or sort of in theory, it would have been easy to write, and it was the strangest thing. Like when I like I don't like to romanticize the process or mystify it or anything like that. But when I started writing it, which is to say, when I started writing it by hand on the page, I just felt like the air go out of the room, like it's not what I want it's not what I want from writing. Like at the moment, I'm working on like a screenplay for the Bee Sting, and that's quite like, it's difficult work. Like it's really difficult because it's just you were trying to fit it into a template, and you were kind of curtailed by the form, and you don't have all these liberties you have with fiction. And when I think about writing, like when I yearn to write, start something new, but I'm not thinking like I'll just bang one out, because like that's not what the job gives me, And the thing is about writing, like it's the market is such a mysterious thing that even if you were to be cynical and say like, I'll write a short one, that's not necessarily what people are going to go for.
Yeah, you have no idea.
It's just it's a total mystery.
Yeah.
It's a total mystery. So when publishers, like all of these, the miraculous thing about this book, which has had this wonderful run, it does all of these things that like people supposedly aren't able to do anymore. Like it's a long book, it's very plotty. You've got to pay attention to us, to follow us, and
got a long stream of consciousness section in the middle.
Yeah, so all of these things that like readers supposedly like aren't willing to do anymore or aren't able to do anymore, like they absolutely are able to do. So I mean, it's been very kind of just a refutation like I'm a pessimistic person, and this has been like just this wonderful kind of disabusing.
We'll show you, said the universe.
There, you can never second guess
Yeah,
the universe,
yeah.
you know?
It's very funny to hear you tell the story of taking 3 ideas to your editor and asking, her to choose one, and coming away starting this romantic comedy set in Trinity College. Because if you think about it, you could imagine the bee sting as the result of you starting to write a romantic comedy in Trinity College that just went completely off the rails, expanded far beyond its remit, and ended up 650 pages in a tragedy. But that's not what happened.
Like, well, I guess it almost is, because like the girl in the romantic comedy was Cass, so that was like, so I started writing it, and like it was a South Dublin boy. South Dublin is the posh part of Dublin, and it was going to be a boy meets girl thing, and the girl was going to have this prepper father back in this Midlands town, who was kind of this humorous figure. Oh, Dad's building a bunker in the woods. He's gone crazy. And when I didn't want to write about the South Dublin boy, because I wrote a book about schoolboys called in South Dublin called Skippy Dies, and it's also 650 pages long. So that well was pretty dry, and that character didn't really interest me. But when I started thinking about the girl and what might have happened to her, that I imagine her as having this scar on her wrist, and I thought, like, wow, what's going on with the scar on her wrist? And she'd fallen through a glass table when she was drunk, and that image really sort of intrigued me, and the prepper dad really intrigued me. What would drive a successful, businessman in Midlands town to do something like it? Prepping doesn't really exist in Ireland to the same degree it does on the internet.
Or in our fair country.
Well, I wasn't going to say that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Ireland's quite like, it's very influenced by America. Much more so than the UK. So you do get these kind of quite extreme sort of like little subcultures developing. But I was really sort of like fascinated by that idea of like, once I stopped trying to make it funny, a lot of doors were opened up, and the idea of like,
that prepper father in particular is way more interesting to explore if you're not trying to make a joke of him.
Like, I think just the idea that the world is evil. Like, if you start thinking the world is evil, then you're in a very dark place. If you start thinking that people are bad, people are hostile, and the only thing you can do is to secede, from civilization, and the only way you can protect your family is to withdraw from the world and like literally build a wall around you. That's a very dark place to be. But I can understand it. I can understand it because we all live with like a stream of horror coming at us from our phones like every minute of the day, and the way that the world is represented on our phones or in the sort of the virtual world, it does seem like this kind of place of Stygian darkness, where ultimately the wise man would be ready to bug out, and flee to his shelter. Yeah.
All right, now I'm going to read you some quotes that you've said about your career. Yeah. The first time I was nominated for the Booker Prize, I found the experience somewhat overwhelming. My friends keep telling me to enjoy it this time, and that's what I'm trying to do. Did you enjoy it the second time?
No, of course not. No, it's like I don't want to alienate the Booker people.
I'm sure they're
in case
not.
You never know, because like some kind of smart,
they're everywhere.
Some smart aleck will be compiling the quotes, and no, it's really like the Booker thing. It really turbocharges the book. It just takes it to another dimension. They've got this kind of like it's a marketing campaign effectively, and once it cranks up, like it just all you do is interviews for like the foreseeable future. So when I went to the ceremony, which is about this time last year, the previous year's winner, Shehan Karanoutikala, said that he had spent the last 13 months, he'd written one page. And all he had done was like talk and write emails, like just talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. And he seemed kind of into it, but like it's like someone said to me, a writer friend said to me that like it's so hard to get your book noticed, you know, and like having a spotlight like the Booker Prize is it's like a once in a lifetime thing, maybe twice in a lifetime thing if you're lucky. um, but so you've got to seize it, you know, and you've got to take advantage of it. And so I did that. Like I talked and talked and talked and talked and talked, and it was just weird. Like I mean, Jonathan Franzen talked about. I think when he was touring with the Corrections, he came to Dublin and he talked about it as a kind of pleasant illness, which I thought was quite a nice way of describing it. Like just where you're kind of incapacitated, but there's nothing wrong with you, you know, except that people are buying your book. But people buying your book is quite a strange thing to happen, you know, in the life of a writer, you know. So
Right, you never count on it.
that's not what you are doing it for, you know. Or if you are, you're going to be disappointed. So it was just this. It was this very strange, surreal process that went on and on and on. In Ireland, it was this. There was four Irish writers on the long list, so it became this kind of like this news story in itself. The Fab Four. We were all very unhappy about that, but but it was nothing we could do. And then there was three polls on the shortlist. And then very late on, I found out that Jonathan Escoffery, his first name's actually Paul, so there was 4 Pauls on the shortlist.
One of the other quotes I have here is, "This has been a really good time for Pauls."
I did a book club. I spent a semester in Boston in 2022 and teaching, and I did a book club in the city, and there was just 4 older men at the book club. That was the extent of the book club, and they were very, very nice. And one of them was called Paul, and he said to me at the end, you know, there's not many of us left.
Carry on the name, the first name.
I think he thought we were both going down in the same ship, you know.
Yeah.
It's like yeah. But like there has been a resurgence in Paul, so like it was, you know, and I gathered. Well, anyway, yeah, it would. Yeah.
I'm going to be 50 in a couple of years, which is just insane. How could such a thing happen? I guess you sort of entertain illusions or delusions up to a certain point that you can still turn your life around and do something else for a living. You've got a couple years left, right?
I mean, what was it? I don't know. What was I talking? I mean, I don't know what I was talking about there. You know?
Do you still feel like if it all goes haywire, I can still turn it around and do something else? Or do you feel pretty much stuck with being a writer at this point?
I mean, I feel like I think like what my mother always said. It's my mother's birthday today, so I had a conversation with her, and she was like, so I think she
Happy
said,
birthday, Mrs. Murray.
well, she was like, I called her from Washington D.C., and she said, yeah, I think your other brother is trying to get through, so. But what I said, did you get the flowers I sent? Yeah, they're very nice. Now I have to go and Zoom your brother. But she would always try and get me to be a dentist, and I think of all the jobs I could have done, that would be one that I feel would have just caused so much pain to me and to
Your
my patients.
patients, yeah.
I feel like, you know, yeah. Aging is crazy. Like there's a quote that Jeff Dyer quoted this, and I thought it was from J.M. Barrie, but it's not. It's from a painter, I believe, called George Oppen, and he says, "Aging, it's the strangest thing to happen to a little boy. It's just this, like, what's going on? It just you know, it just happens." And I like to sort of there's sort of like a temptation to kind of like to dramatize. I don't know if melodramatize is not a word, but just sort of to play up these big birthdays. 50, whoo, you know, and sort of when you do this, you're kind of saying to yourself, it will stop at 50, you know, but it doesn't. Like just, you know, then you're 51 and 52.
I know. It just keeps, if you're
so
lucky.
on. If you're lucky. I guess you get to a certain point where you start seeing the off ramp, and you think like, well, if I can just like white knuckle it like for another sort of 15 years, 17 years, that's like another like book and a half for me, you know. So
Spoken like a guy who lives in a country with a social welfare system. Yeah.
while I was in Boston, you know, I did a public lecture, and all of the questions were like, how it's you've spent 8 years writing a book, like how did you do this?
How did you live?
And yeah,
how did you
and
feed yourself in those 8 years?
yeah, it's something that we sort of take for granted. Like I guess it's impossible here, right? Unless you've got a trust fund or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. The last one, and then we're going to take questions from you fine people. Or if you have quotes that you'd like to confront Paul with, please feel free. I remember when I was 7 or 8 telling people I wanted to do something in cybernetics. When I got a little bit older, I realized that working in science would not involve actually building Cybermen. You weren't a dentist, but at one point you wanted to be a scientist. Does any of that remain? Tasked with building a Cyberman right now, would you approach the task with excitement and enthusiasm?
Cyberman. I didn't know. There's a show called Doctor Who. I don't know if that's you guys. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
who knows? Okay, so the Cybermen were like they weren't the Daleks. They're like the second tier, like villains. They're recurring villains. And in retrospect, they weren't super scary. But like that word, Cyberman, was just I found it really exhilarating. And that word cyberspace. Which I think it might have been William Gibson's.
Yeah, he coined it.
He coined it, right? And he said it's the place you are when you're talking on the phone. Like this idea that like there's some kind of this is elsewhere that we can kind of disappear into, and that's where we are now. Like it's really fascinating. Like it's really this kind of like this that we spend so much of our lives like disembodied. And as you said, you were saying back in the green room, like just like that we're sort of in competition with our online selves, you know,
Right.
that we feel sort of overshadowed by our online selves. I think the world of AI is really just seeing the technology kind of not mesh with, but sort of crash into the sort of the core human traits is really terrifying, but also really interesting. So like just the way that we can. Silicon Valley is so relentlessly evil, and it sort of tries to sort of present these kind of like these sort of like these like necrotized versions of reality. It's a real kind of Pet Sematary sort of a vibe to a lot of it, you know. So the idea that you can combat grief, for instance, with like sort of like it's an AI version of your lost partner, you know, and like I find that really really interesting. Like I don't think that I would like to do that. But I think it's I find it really compellingly interesting that these are the guys. So Cyberman, as you all know, it comes from Kyber. It's the Greek for steersman. So who's steering the ship? And the guys steering the ship are people with like missing vast amounts of like what it takes to make up a human being.
Right.
You know?
It's like 10% of the soul of a normal person.
Yeah, right. So like it's really interesting, sort of like, and we're in their world. We're living according to those templates. So who's steering the steersman is a question that it's like I would try and get a book out of that at some point, definitely.
All right, we would love to have questions from you. If you have a question, please step up to the mic right here and say it loud and proud into that mic, so not only everyone here, but the people watching at home can hear what you have to say. Well, we have a little race. I like it. Yes.
Hi, I loved the book. I was wondering if there's a way that you can talk about the ending, the very end.
Oh, I've got one about that. But yeah, just go ahead and talk about the ending. You said you thought about doing an epilogue or something, and then you tried it for a while, but it didn't work at all, so you just had to leave it the way it was.
Do you want me to I can give
to just repeat that?
I've done very sort of just very, because the question comes up quite a lot, and it's a funny thing. Like it's again, like I don't like to kind of to mystify the writing process, but there's a lot of sort of just gut stuff in there, and when I got to the end, like which is the end of the book, that you know on the last page, it just felt right. It just felt right, but I did try, and as Dan has kind of
as I unearthed,
as Dan has unearthed, like I had a few goes at just kind of clarifying for readers, like what's
7 years later or whatever.
Well, there was different versions. So it was going to be 5 minutes later, and X person would stumble on the scene, or it was like a month later, or it was like there was like the Rose's ghost appears and says to X, "This has happened," or it's 10 years later, and there's some people talking about the town about the other terrible murder, whatever it might be, and all of those epilogues felt like they were taking something away from the ending. Like it's a strange thing. Like so, I would say two things about the ending, which won't answer your question. But I had a teacher called Ali Smith, who is a Scottish novelist, and she's been nominated for the Booker 4 times, and she's got to the point where she no longer allows her books to be submitted because she finds it's a year of your life that's just gone.
That's what I do too.
That's what happens. Okay, right, yeah. So Ali was my tutor in when I did my masters, and she's a great person as well as being an amazing writer. And she says she had this idea about structure, that books are circular. So when you get to the end, you're right back where you started. So everything's the same except it's completely different. And that's why I was really interested in that as a way of structuring the bee sting. The sense that these characters are like in this kind of doom loop, or they think they're in a doom loop. They think they're in a Greek tragedy and they can't get out, but maybe they could get out if they saw it differently. That was one thing. And the other thing was like, I always think about with regard to endings, David Lynch talks about Twin Peaks. And you guys are familiar with Twin Peaks, so
Yes.
right. So who killed Laura Palmer? And in season 2 of Twin Peaks, the network brought pressure onto David Lynch to wrap up this, to reveal who killed Laura Palmer, and he says that it just killed the show stone dead because people they think they want to know the answer, but they don't really want to know the answer. Like the mystery is always like, how many movies have I seen where you find out like who the killer is or who the alien is or whatever, and it's always like, oh, okay, right, it's like it's a kraken, or it's like it's the butler or whatever, and it's always like it's the door being just like just there being like sort of a hint of something more beyond. I find like really intriguing. So like I didn't know what readers would make of it, but I didn't think either that it would be like a big deal. But I gather that it's caused some kind of conversation. So that's bringing people together. So that can't be
It's
a bad
more
thing.
fun to argue about something like that than it is to be like, oh, I guess that's how it ended. Yeah, I think. Thank you for your question.
Thank
You
you.
have the first questioner as well. Thank you.
I was also going to ask that question because I'm in the Solus Nua book club and we read the book.
And everyone agreed that the ending was perfect.
We had a very long argument about who shot who. So, but I do have a second question in the bag.
Hit it.
So would you care to speculate who will win the Booker this year?
Oh wow. Okay. I don't know. I mean, I gotta say I don't really follow prizes that much. Like I think that they can be really kind of bad for your mental health, and lots of books don't get on the shortlist or the right shortlist or whatever it might be. So it's not something that I would sort of like avidly pursue. That said, I've read some great Booker novels. I think of Anna Burns's book Milkman. That's just a stone cold, just a brilliant book. My God! And if that book hadn't won the Booker, I don't think it would have got like any attention. It's a really brilliant book. Eleanor Catton's book, The Luminaries, likewise. So many great books. Kazuo Ishiguro, who should have won it like a few times. This time round, I've only read Rachel Kushner's book, Creation Lake, which is very good. I'm reading Huckleberry Finn to my son so that I can read James. I think James is the one that's ought to win, but sometimes that means you don't win. So I hope the right book wins.
Did they get any Pauls this year?
They made a statement saying it's time for the Pauls to step aside, and as if like we'd been sort of lobbying we had not been doing that.
Hi. So I actually haven't read the print version. I've only listened to it. And obviously there are very distinct voices in the book. And I was wondering what, if any, your hand played in the audiobook and like choosing the different narrators, because I loved listening to the full cast, and I was wondering how your hand played into the final product.
Or were they all you doing a bunch of voices?
Well, the audiobook, people, well, audiobooks are like a really big deal now. So that's just a recent thing, I think. But I gather I can't listen to my own books. I mean, I just find it too strange. But in Penguin, there's a guy called Gray Everly, and he was the producer of the audiobook, and he was just driven to make it as perfect as he could.
You did a great job.
He did well. I'm glad to hear it. Like, and several people have said it to me. And but he would send me samples of the actors, and that was a really interesting process because the accent is really important. And it's if you're a producer in London, you don't necessarily know what a Midlands accent is.
And was he giving you clips of them reading bits of the book, or just other things they'd done? Like, how could you know if they could do the Midlands accent?
Yeah, both things. Yeah, but he'd say things like, "Oh, I think they could learn a Midlands accent," you know, and it's tricky, you know, because lots of people, like Ireland is a place of many accents, and sometimes Hollywood stars will come over and
Sometimes.
well, they'll like, I'm trying to think. There was quite a recent example of someone getting the accent wrong, and like it doesn't make any difference, obviously, outside of Ireland. But in Ireland, it'll be like just like nails down a blackboard.
That
So
John
you don't
Patrick
get-
Shanley movie, which was also about bees. The one with Amy Adams.
Was that The Wild Time?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Jesus, right? Okay, yeah.
You didn't say it, but I sure did.
There's a few. I mean, I guess they must make money. But so Gray was like very much on top of that, and he did a great job. The only place where he really needed me to contribute was the last line, because the last line of the book is unattributed, but obviously someone needs to say it. So we had sort of like a debate about who should speak the last line, and Dickie speaks the last line. But no, it was.
But that's not necessarily canon, is what you're saying.
It wasn't a problem that I had foreseen in writing the book, and it wasn't
Right.
really a problem. But it is sort of like part of the point of that last line is that it is unattributed.
Right.
But we had to make a call, so, and that was the call that made most sense.
Thank you.
Hi. So you said you don't over outline, and it seems like the inspiration for this book started with Cass and with Dickie in his bunker. So at what point did you get the idea that the bee sting and the revelation about what the bee sting is would be the sort of inciting incident or the center of the Russian nesting doll of trauma?
That's a great question, and I'll see if I can answer it successfully. So many years ago, my wife had a friend who was on her way to her wedding, and a bee flew in the window of the car and got trapped in her veil. And I thought, like, what an incredible scene! Like, and like, it's such a it's such a beautiful instance of the uncontrollability of life, or the capacity of life to surprise you. Because, like, what's more controlled and planned than your wedding day? You know. Yet here comes life through the window just to throw you this crazy curveball. So, She didn't get stung, but she did have a freak out in her car, and I tried for so long to use that scene because I thought it's so cinematic as well. You can just see the car, you know, driving down the country lane and screeching to a halt. And so I wanted to start the book with that scene, but it always felt kind of fake. And the weird thing about writing, one of the many weird things, is that often stories that are directly taken from real life feel like unreal. They feel false. And that's it. It always felt kind of like hokey or Irish or like wild time, kind of there's that sort of sense of unreality to it. So in the book, it appears in this, the nesting begins where you don't see This happens to Imelda, who's Cass's mum in the book. The bee flies through the car window, and it does sting her on the eye. And you hear that story quite early on. It's told to Cass as it's a family. Everyone in the town knows it except her, and it's this sort of humiliating thing that happened to her mother. So the story didn't work as like just sort of a straight up kind of like narrating, but it did work as a story within a story. And as you move through the book, you start to realize that like all of these characters' lives are constructed out of stories that are sort of that the town is kind of constructed, and behind them is something completely different and darker. And right at the end of the book, you find out what actually happened to Imelda and in the car. But that idea that that stories, like in a small town, and like Dublin, I'm from Dublin, but Dublin's a small town. It's made up, everybody knows everybody, and one of the ways that that knowing manifests is people know you by your family name. Who are you? You're a Barnes, or you're a Murray, whatever it might be. So you must be Christie's son, you must be Kathleen's son, and you must be Donny's nephew, blah 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 blah, and they fix you on this map, and it doesn't really matter who you are in the eyes of the town. You're just sort of the latest iteration of this kind of long string of, and you'll basically do the same stuff as all the other, Donaghy's or Murray's or whatever it might be, and that's quite a sort of a claustrophobic kind of a sense. And sort of stories are assigned to your family. That are kind of regarded as kind of defining the kind of person that you are as well. And the stories are always kind of calcified versions of something different. And Ireland is a place where people make stories up to cover terrible things that have happened. It's a place where people have got very good at telling stories because behind the stories is like this unbroachable silence. It's like this black water under this beautiful scrim of ice. So I was really interested in that, like even within a family that seems so kind of like a nuclear family, like they seem sort of dense and so connected to each other. There's huge sort of swathes of each other's lives that they don't know about, and that sort of blindness to each other means that they're not able to help each other when they most need it. And it's the stories that are stopping them from seeing each other.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more very fast question and answer.
Okay, very fast. When I was reading this book, I couldn't help but imagine it on screen, like as a TV series or a movie. If you had to cast the 4 members of the Barnes family, who would you cast?
And you're right, you are writing a screenplay right now. Yeah, and I assume they just let you cast whoever you want. Yeah, so who's it going to be?
I was in New York yesterday, and I met Alec Baldwin on the street. I was just walking down the street. I was like, "That's Alec Baldwin."
That's what they do in New York.
Apparently so. I was like, I went up and
just roll them out.
You're that Alec Baldwin, and as if he had been waiting. He was very courteous and and allowed me to take a picture of him. So Alec Baldwin will play all of the roles in the show. So that's the plan. That's the plan for the show.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Paul.